One man who's had a pivotal role in all of this is the CEO of the Australian Cricketers Association, Alistair Nicholson. Alistair, welcome to SEN.
Thank you, Jared.
Same question as it was to Justin. What would it mean for the three of them to walk out in baggy greens in the first Ashes test for all that's transpired?
Oh, look, it's for any player, a pretty incredibly exciting time to be walking out in the Ashes in the UK. Obviously, from an ACA or a Player Association point of view, selection is one for Cricket Australia and all members are equal. But if and when Cam is selected to join Dave and Steve, the road that they've travelled has been significant. And I think Justin's hit the nail on the head there. I think they've done their time, but I think they've done it very, very well. And hopefully now they have their opportunity at redemption, albeit in a pretty tough environment in the UK.
When you saw it firsthand in South Africa and the dealings that you had to go straight into, how far away did it seem that the possibility that the three of them could be back for the Ashes? How far away a reality was that?
Oh, look, an incredibly long way away. Like if I go back sort of 14 or 15 months and just dealing on the ground in Cape Town, just dealing with the players physically, mentally, they realised what had happened and what had been done and the enormity of it. And then the period that followed in the 6 months through their welfare and support and everything that needed to be worked through with Cricket Australia, the public, everyone had a point of view. If they do or walk out or when they do in the future, I think they have grown incredibly as people, but they have been through a significant amount. And I know there's listeners and people that doesn't change their view on what they think about it, but it does give you pause for thought.
Is it a triumph for the collective, for them individually, for the team, for the governing body, for the new coaching staff, and for the Players Association to be able to heal all of this in such a manner that it feels quite natural?
Look, I think the reintegration, if you like, of obviously Steve and Dave into the World Cup squad has been well worked through. Belinda Clark and Justin Langer have played a role and included us in that, which I think is been good. What I would say, though, is I think the players would go, well, hang on, triumph or whatever you want to say is we haven't won the Ashes. I think Steve and Dave have got considerable things that they want to do to redeem themselves and prove themselves. So I think it's an important step and that should be, if it happens, appreciated, but there's still a lot to go in their minds.
And the collective healing, that all the players have come together in such a way that there's not even a ripple anymore. For all the discussions that were had, there's not even a ripple that this shouldn't be happening from the players' perspective.
Yeah, I think that's something that has really gathered a lot of steam. I think the one-day squad spent a fair bit of time in May. They obviously travelled through to Gallipoli. So there's been a lot of opportunity to integrate those guys. But I personally didn't see that to be problematic. I think it was just a case of getting everyone together in the same room with some consistent leadership, which Justin has given. And, now Steve and Dave, their relationship is really good, and with their teammates, they're very focused. So the greater good or the collective is really pulled everyone together.
How central a figure has Justin Langer been? He's spoken remarkably frankly at various times as cricket's dysfunctional family just before the summer and then at the steps along the way. How do you think he's managed what could have, or what I'm sure was a tricky situation?
Yeah, look, I think as I made a comment around Belinda Clark before, I think he's had some good people around him, but he's been clear in what he wants, and if people are coming in and out of the team, what the values are, the style of play, and things like that. So I think having that consistency and that alignment to that has been really important. Now that seems quite obvious, but when you have lots of different formats, lots of pressure, players coming in and out, that is something I think that's been re-established post Cape Town.
How do you hope the public reacts to it? Do you hope that they allow the redemption story that sport so often does?
Look, I think the Australian public is open to that. I do think everyone has their point of view, and often people haven't changed in this, which is interesting. But I do think they're open just because the players have really served their ban very well. I do think public are open to it. But as I said before, there's still a lot of work to do in the players' minds, and it's not just getting selected for the test match. It's what happens in the series, what happens in the summer, and onwards.
The overall build-up to the series, so it offered tricks, it offered difficulties. The intra-club, I think, worked, although you've got I'm not sure cricket's a great sport for intra-clubs, but it seemed to gather a large number together, 25 at once. Justin Langer said never been done before. What's the Players Association's view about how this has been executed over 3 months?
Look, I think what was good is we knew what we were dealing with. So that didn't chop and change. So that's important. I think I'm spending some time in the UK with the players later in August, and so I'll seek their feedback on that. But I think overall it's been positive. I think we had some guys already there playing county cricket, which was important. But post the World Cup and the uniqueness of the World Cup, there needed to be a little red ball cricket, particularly for Steve and Dave and guys that hadn't played a lot of red ball recently. So I think it was appropriate. It was obviously a big undertaking, but time will tell.
Do you feel like all of your members have been given their best chance?
Yeah, I think so. Look, this is obviously a huge series and tour to be selected on, and over the Australian summer, there players that were given some opportunities. So yeah, I do think now it's tough on selection, but that's probably really what you want in your national team. You want players in the team knowing they've got to perform well for their spot, and you want other guys absolutely, tearing the door down to get in.
So if there had been a level of discontent around pecking orders and selectors making what I think felt like random picks or maybe X factor picks, do you think that has levelled itself out across World Cup selection and across the Ashes selection, that the players would feel a level of comfort in understanding what the path to the team is, and maybe Matthew Wade becomes the poster boy for that?
Yeah, I think, obviously this test team is looking like it's going to be different from the team that played in the last test in Australia. So I do think that's a fair point. But I think all players have been communicated well around what's expected from them. Obviously, it doesn't go to plan perfectly for them, but it's certainly been a long build-up, and that's been sort of well communicated to the players around what's expected. I do think that this 5-test series is probably going to be, it's like a chess game, be as tactical a series as opposed just to sort of session-to-session cricket that there's been. And I do think that Justin and the selectors have got a view on how they use their bowling unit and what they're trying to get with their batting matchups, or as they say today. So I think that's a really important part of T20 cricket, and it'll now tactically really build into Test cricket.
Alistair Nicholson's the Chief Executive of the ACA in the studio. Fixtures have been released. This has been the source of friction and much discussion right across the summers. How does one-day domestic cricket fit with Shield cricket, fit with the BBL? Do you think we have a more logical and a more serviceable setup now to aid the national teams than we had previously?
I think there's been some really good improvements. And this is something that we've been talking about for a number of years in the male and female game. And so from an ACA and player point of view, it feels like we've been able to be heard in regard to some of the changes that have happened in the domestic schedule. So if you take the female game, we now have more WNCL, which is the 50-over version of the game, which that is probably one of the biggest issues that the female players have just continually talked to us about. So obviously with the signing of the media rights deals has meant that we've been able to work in some extra games. We've been able to cover those match payments. And it's something that all female players have been really, really adamant about. And so to be able to take that to Cricket Australia and to be able to fit it into the schedule, which is complicated, has been really heartening. And then I think, and you may want to talk about it more, some of the changes of the BBL I think are positive as well, and they represent some of the stuff we inputted into the process.
So is the shorter window more desirable?
Yes, it is. That was the biggest thing. Players often talked about the gap between games. And, whilst the sort of number of games, there was some concern about the step change that it was last year with the two new media partners in Fox and Seven, pushing that closer together, having it more as a holiday tournament, and then expanding the finals has been well received. And so I think those improvements to the schedule is something that is positive from our point of view, because we feel like we've been pushing some of that, and now it's been able to change.
50 over men's domestic cricket, does it now feel like less of a get it out of the way and more of a showpiece than it has in recent years?
Yeah, look, I mean, you sit down and talk to players, and you go, where did you learn or get confidence that you could play at the international level, or where did you cut your teeth? And they do say really hard domestic cricket. So where we, even in some of the vernacular around the sport, we're talking about the 50 over competition as a pre-season competition or for game development. I think we've seen just recently in England how important the 50 over format is. So to be able to have that staggered through the pre-Christmas period with some Shield, which has got some similarities to what it was 10 or 12 years ago, that has been well received. And look, it's not necessarily going to change things straight away, but I think it does show that if a player's injured, then they've still got another opportunity, or they're out of form. It's not just gone at the start of the year. Does
the Shield season unveiled yesterday give all of your members the best chance to push for Test selection at various stages?
It does. Obviously, getting the some Shield games close to the Test series so that players that are in form can run into selection, a little bit like what's happened in the Australia A game just recently in the UK. So I think that's positive. And then I think the other thing of the male schedule is that there's been a push to get back on the first class grounds where internationals are played. One of the things the players would talk about is you don't want to be potentially going out to play for Australia on the SCG if you haven't played a lot of one-day cricket because you've been playing at North Sydney or Drummoyne or something like that.
Yeah, so good steps there. Have what we've seen in the women's Ashes, is that a reflection of all the good work that's been done by Cricket Australia and by the Players Association over a generation to stimulate the women's side of the game? So more than just one team being more skilled than the other, but one nation being more proactive and more set up than the other?
Yeah, I think that's a really important part of it. When I first started, we made a decision around putting the male and female players together in one collective agreement, and that obviously meant standardising a lot of things, bringing the female players up to receive similar terms and conditions to the male players, the gender equity model. So that's been something is really unprecedented in Australian sport and world sport. So I think cricket has done a really good thing there, and CA and ACA have worked well there. So I do think those institutional things have allowed players to become more professional, and you're now seeing the results of that. I also think, and knowing that team and some of the personalities in that team, they're very determined players, and so the loss they had a couple of years ago in the UK has really galvanised them, and they're really at the peak of their powers. So I think it's a combination of that team really wanted to lay their mark on world cricket and those players, but they've also been well supported by the system.
And the overall, Alistair, it was one of the recommendations that the relationship between Cricket Australia and the Players Association had to improve. It does feel from the outside there's been a lot of steps taken in that direction. Is that the truth of what's happening behind closed doors?
Yeah, look, we've always talked about being as professional as we can from the ACA point of view. And I think what's happened sort of post-November is there's been good dialogue between the boards and between the president, Greg Dyer, and the chairman of Cricket Australia and Earl Eddings. And so those groups have met formally and informally. And so that's been a really important part of being able to improve the relationship. Obviously, operationally, there's a lot of crossover between the two organisations, and that's been ongoing. But in support of the two boards meeting, there's also in the background been the Longstaff review and some of those recommendations around Australian Cricket Committee and Ethics Committee Commission are really important to the overall structure of the support, because I think they just give the overall relationship a bit more structure, and I think that's positive from our point of view.
So is there less combativeness? Is there less sort of opposition in what you do? There'll always be natural conflict as you
Yeah, and
push for
I
outcomes.
think I was at a CEO's conference a few months ago, which is the key people at Cricket Australia, management, and then the CEOs of the state bodies, and it was just talking around. Well, our role is not necessarily to agree with everything, and that's okay. We would just like to be respected for if we do have a point of view. We like to understand decisions, and then we also like to be able to be given enough time to be able to respond where appropriate. So I think that was important in probably just laying down the law in regard to it's actually okay if there is some tension there. It's natural in the relationship that we've got.
It's an exciting 6 weeks ahead, so a lot of sleepless nights ahead.
Yeah, you do look like you're a kid in a candy store or the night before Christmas. So it's exciting, and it's exciting that the female team have been able to regain the Ashes and will complete a really solid series, and then we now see what happens in the male Ashes.